Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The interview you're about to discover has been filmed during the Fighting Fantasy Fest 5 in London in late September 24. It is the interview of Géraldine Cook. Well, if you don't know the lady, let's say that if you like game books, as I do, it's namely thanks to her. She was responsible of the first printing of the first edition of the first real interactive game book ever made in England by Sir Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, of course, the warlock of the Firetop Mountain. So, well, here is the thing. We need this introduction because my friend G and I were so moved while beginning the interview that we actually forget to record the first minute. Beg your pardon for that. I hope you will enjoy it as much as we loved it. Enjoy. Okay.
And there were crosswords which sold a lot. And I thought, well, we've got very upmarket crossword books, the Sunday Times, the Times, crossword Penguin. But I know that if we got a popular newspaper, they'd sell even more. So I was trying to think of different things to do with the games list. But I was also the science fiction editor. And I suddenly realised somebody pointed out to me that these things could cross over, games and fantasy. And then my friend at the time, Jeff Johns, was at university, had been at university where he had started to play Dungeons and Dragons, which he told me about, which I didn't know anything about.
Yeah, it was brand new.
And it sounded, I couldn't understand it. And I never went to any of the, he never said, come with me to anything. So I didn't go, obviously. And but he told me about to go to Games Workshop to talk to Steve and Ian.
It was the first shop that just opened a few years ago.
A few years before.
Before.
And it wasn't that far from Penguin at the time, in the Hammersmith Road at that point. And I thought, well, I could walk there on my way to work, because where I lived in Holland Park, which is just up the road, it was a sort of 20-minute walk. And I thought, on the way to work, I could pop in and see these people, and there where we were. And that was how I walked in and said, I'm from Penguin Books, I'm the games editor. Is there any way that to put what you're all doing into a book that we could publish? And that's what occurred. And so they said, well, it's funnily enough, as I recall, and they might tell you a different story, but as I recall, they said they had already been thinking about it. And then I just walked in, So I said, well, I'll have to have something written down, a proposal, some document that I can show to our editorial board, because they'll know even less. At least I know you, and I know it's important and growing, and I'm the games editor, and I'm trying to think of a way how we bring these things together. And so I think a few months later, they gave me a ring on the old-fashioned phones, and said whether it was Ian or Steve. Probably they said it's Steve and Ian, and we've got the proposal. We'd like to drop it off on you. So they came to where we were in the King's Road in Chelsea. So it's all sort of near. They probably walked down there and gave me their proposal, which I couldn't really understand, but I could see it was something, and I wanted to, the editorial meetings. I'm sure you all have many meetings now, but we had this meeting once a week, and obviously you had to have something new to talk about. Otherwise, what were you doing? That was your job as an editor, to come up with ideas.
Sure.
And so
novelties and
exactly. And so I said, well, I think there's something here that we could do for the games list. And as you know the story, that nobody listened.
It was the Magic Quest. It was the name of their work, the code name in a way.
Yes, that's right.
Magic Quest.
Yes. And I'm afraid it went down very badly. Nobody could understand it. They kept laughing. Oh, there's nothing to see. I said, well, not really, but you imagine it, and then well, where's the board? I said, well, there isn't a board. There isn't anything. And the more I said there wasn't anything, and people were just falling about laughing, particularly the boss, who was very good, and I liked him. And he was very forward-seeing. But when I went on about sort of trolls, and they were just falling all over the place. And I said, but you've heard of Tolkien. I mean, That's great literature. All of this stuff has grown out of Tolkien. It must have done. And Tolkien came from sagas from the past, because Tolkien was a professor, wasn't he, of Icelandic?
Absolutely.
And so that's where those sagas were coming from. You could see there was a line, towards it. And I said, no, nothing. I couldn't get it through. So eventually I suddenly thought, you're barking up the wrong tree.
Okay.
You should take it to children's department, which was upstairs in the building. And I don't think it hadn't ever been done before. There wasn't really, we knew the people as colleagues, but we didn't work with them. You didn't take an adult book to the children's and say, can you do something with this as well? It hadn't happened yet. There's much more crossover now since J.K. Rowling, as you know, became adult and children's. And adults had always read Tolkien, but people had forgotten that was the case. And so I just gave it to the head of Puffins, and said, well, what do you think? And months went by. At least 3 months without any. I thought, oh, well, they didn't like it. And Steve and Ian would ring up and I'd suggest other publishers. I remember suggesting, because by then we'd become friends, as it were. And I cared about them and their book to get it published. So I would suggest at least one other publisher, and they maybe had some ideas. But no, still nobody could see it. So they came back, I'm happy to say. And around that time, the head of the children's books, marvellous gentleman called Patrick Hardy, he came wandering down the corridor, which of course he would never be seen on our corridors. And I could see he was swinging the manuscript, walking like that, the manuscript. And I thought, well, this is it. He's going to say, yeah, good fun, but we can't do it. But it was the opposite. He went, we think we'd like to. We think we can run with it. Can you arrange for us to meet the authors? So then I called up the boys and said, come and meet my colleagues at Puffin. And there were some lovely people. There was Barry Cunningham, who later went to Bloomsbury, and he was the one that recognised J.K. Rowling.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, we've worked together at Penguin, and he's a publisher on his own now. Very good, Chicken Shed.
Okay.
Barry Cunningham, and he worked, as I say, he was the marketing and publicity and all that. So he recognised there was a lot of people turned down the first J.K. Rowling, as I'm sure you know. A lot of publishers turned it down, but Barry was the one that recognised it, and he was by then at Bloomsbury. So that's how that happened. Wow. Because again, having been at Penguin, you were used to looking ahead and finding different ideas and making things up on the hoof. So, obviously what we were doing, all the things that had ever been done and the classics, and you kept all that, you protected them, but must find the new. We knew that we wanted to find new writing, new ideas. Okay. And because I did have the games list and the fantasy list, neither of which I knew anything about. I'd never played games and I'd never read fantasy apart from the classics. Okay. So, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know these lists. But I realised you've got to do something different. Keep the wonderful things that are great, like the Bridge and of course, look after those books. They are the great staple of the list and they're important authors. But you've got to find new things, and it was just the spirit that we had. Everybody was the same. The editors,
sure.
We all wanted to do
unknown, of course.
Unknown, and different people had different areas. Of course, there was a fiction editor and non-fiction, and somebody else did crime. I eventually ended up doing crime as well. Okay. Yeah, so I had, Penguin is and was so huge in the breadth of what it published. So each editor would end up with about 5 or 6 or 7 or even 8 or 10 different areas to look for, and so your brain was continually going around. Oh, that's the crime, yeah. But you could do it. It was lovely.
It was good. It was a so good idea because right now we are attending to the Fighting Fantasy Fest 5 in London, and we have so blessed and lucky to have a chat, an improvised chat with Miss Géraldine Cook. If you like fighting fantasy game books. Sorry, I'm tired. Game books. You know what? If you like it, if you have someone on the shelf, it's thanks to her, because she's the one who saw that there was an opportunity, and so we are now hearing and learning from her how everything began. So okay, basically it was a kind of handbook, of a kind of vademecum for role-playing games, actually, because Dungeon and Dragon was absolutely not very known. It was known, it was some success, but it had to be learned by the players, and so that's how it began. I mean, the Magic Quest was a kind of initiation to role-playing games.
And of course, it was Stephen Ian that worked out how to put it into a book form that could then be sold. And it turned out that we meet people here today, don't we? People who read these books when they were mostly boys and men. You know, they read them when they were 10 and 11. I've heard so many people this time and before say they weren't good readers before. They didn't read and weren't interested. And it was either school or their mother or their father or their grandmother. I've heard from one chap, his grandmother took him and got him his first.
Yeah, sure.
And somehow, I don't know quite how it's happened, but it's reasserted itself in the last few years. Maybe it's to do with the lockdown. Did games come back into people's lives more when they were stuck at home? Did people start gaming? And of course, you know more about it than I do, but the whole gaming industry has taken off. But, you know, board games have come back, haven't they? Whoever thought tabletop games would become, as we've seen them here today, is wonderful.
Absolutely. And thanks to you and these books, okay, we learned how to read, and we read more, but also we learned from you to play games and to dream, because all the imagination that comes from this period, the 80s and the 90s, wow, it became the geek culture, which is now absolutely important.
Yes.
And this is an imaginary cinema and so on, and video games, of course. So thank you so much.
Well,
thank you so much.
But
thank
as
you
I
so
say,
much.
it's the authors, Stephen Ian.
Absolutely,
great people.
absolutely.
It was just an amazing coincidence that we all happened to be thinking alike and were met at that specific time.
Right moment and right shake of hands.
It was, but you know, as I say, it was by no means easy, because to make other people see it was very, very difficult.
Okay.
But then we've talked about J.K. Rowling, how many publishers turned her down.
Absolutely.
A lot of publishers, and it's happened with lots of books. You know, 20 people turn it down. Just one person sees it, but an editor has still got to convince his or her colleagues in the publishing house. Unless you're doing it on your own, it's a different thing. But if you're in a company and you want to carry people with you, you've just got to have your passion and carry on.
Absolutely.
You know.
That's the right lesson.